right, we will begin here with Bible class this morning. Those of you who are still out in the parlor, grab your coffees and find your pew. Somebody might take yours. Not that there'll be a hard time finding another one. At any rate, welcome to our Bible class this morning, where we're continuing our look at the book of Exodus and the story of Moses. Not just because it is in and of itself a tremendous story and tremendous work that Moses is called to do, and even greater power that God gives him to do that work, but also because Moses is one of those Old Testament characters who is, in a very real sense, a prefiguring, a forerunner, a foreshadowing, to use all those kind of big English class kinds of words, of none other than our Lord Jesus Christ. And so as we study Exodus, we're doing it not just to get caught up on the Old Testament story and the little peculiarities and ins and outs of the story from the Old Testament perspective, but also to learn about it as it points us to Jesus. And you'll see a little bit of that as the story unfolds, as the class unfolds again this morning. Now, for those of you who are here in the church, there are lesson sheets available about halfway back on the little TV table there. And the sheet this morning contains the last bit of last week's lesson, which we didn't get to, and some new material as we move into Exodus chapter 3 in our study today. For those of you who are joining us online, welcome, and if you have desire to get a copy of the study notes, don't want to give the jokes away too early. They're available at the church website, and through the marvels of technology and never throwing away a computer, I have my old one down here, and the email is open, and if you're at home watching in real time and want to fire a question in there, we'll take a couple breaks during the class to read the mail, so to speak. Speaking of the mail, a couple of you have been in touch regarding Shipra and Pua. And in one case, I have an email that I haven't gotten back to you yet, and someone else has tracked me down and asked me questions out loud. I still have those questions. These are the two midwives. I just, the kind of week it's been, I haven't had a whole lot of extra time to go back into my notes again and find answers for you, but they will appear in your inbox one of these days, which is also important to note. If you do have a question later on after Bible class is finished, or during the week something strikes you and you want to share it with me, please just drop me an email. Most weeks I'm able to give 24-hour turnaround, but every once in a while we get a week like this past one where that, for all kinds of reasons, just doesn't happen. But we'll get there. All right, so here we are. We're going to move into Exodus chapter 3, but before we do that, a few funny things, I hope. I don't know what your kind of week was like, but this was mine. That's why I didn't get anything done this week. All right. Okay, kind of a low start on that, but oh well. Anyway, another picture. I was actually talking with my cousin this week. One of the things that intervened in my work was a cousin of mine from out west, and she phones periodically just to see if I'm still alive, and I'm glad to hear that she is too. She was filling me in on the harvest, which is in their part of Alberta is all over, was done before Thanksgiving, which is actually somewhat of a rarity. And then she sent me a picture of some of what they harvest. The 2022 marshmallow harvest is coming along quite nicely. Sadly, all these marshmallows will be cut up into tiny little bits, put in bags, and mixed with Rice Krispies later in the fall. All right. Halloween is coming, and we all have various opinions on Halloween and those sorts of things. But if you are observing Halloween this year, I think the next slide will give you a way that you can celebrate it and also make it somewhat profitable for you. I said to Susan, I think this would be a pretty cool idea. Just put a vending machine out on the front steps and say, here you go, boys and girls, for $1 you can have a chocolate bar. $1.25 you can get a bag of chips if you're cheap. There's little candies down at the bottom, and you can just put the money in and away you go. Anyway, Halloween is special at our house, not so much for the decorating and all of that, or even the candies and things like that. Halloween is special at our house because our dog just absolutely loves the kids coming to the door. This is the first dog we've had that loves the kids coming to the door. All the others have been more the I'll scare the you-know-what out of you and put some honest fright in you this Halloween. This one, she just visits with all the kids. She thinks it's just the greatest thing going, that one night a year when they all come. And anyway, and then not far behind Halloween is Christmas and the various sales and shows and everything else. And there's one coming up not too far down the road that you might be interested in. In addition to picking up whatever you want, you get to fight children with diabetes. Oops. I think that should be different. I think that should say fight childhood diabetes or something like that, but you can perhaps go, if you want, and wrestle. It fits in with the wrestling theme from our Old Testament reading this morning. If you can't wrestle with God, maybe you can at least fight children with diabetes. Okay, back again, in case you're just joining us late at home, lessons are on the website, questions to my email address, and let's get into the story here. We'll just take a real quick 5 minutes, most, review of Exodus chapter 2, because chapter 2 sets up some of what happens in chapter 3. And we got to get Moses on the scene before we get to calling him. So just very quickly, in case you missed last week, a bit of history about Moses. He's born into a family of the tribe of Levi. These are the people who will become the priests of the Old Testament. And worth noting that in his own way, in addition to being a prophet, a teacher, and a leader, Moses also fulfills the priestly role. He is the intermediary, the one in the middle between God and his people. And the people's concerns come to Moses. Moses brings them to God. God speaks to Moses. Moses proclaims it to the people. He's that guy in the middle, which is really what the priests were in the Old Testament understanding of things. There was, of course, that horrible edict from the Pharaoh that all the babies were to be killed, thrown into the Nile. And we talked a little bit last time about the importance that water plays in the Exodus, and absolutely it does. The book of Exodus is dripping wet, if you will, and it begins with Moses being placed in an ark and then floated down the Nile River. And the ark, as we said before, was similar to a basket that would have been used by the Egyptians in shipping their idols and other more precious commodities. And it's the very same word that's used back in Genesis when Noah gets around to building a ship. It'll also be used in the Exodus story when the Ark of the Covenant is built. And this is, of course, drawn up from the water, which is where Moses gets his name from. His name is related to the words for drawing someone up out of the water. And he's raised by Pharaoh's daughter, some speculation that it might have been a very famous daughter of Pharaoh, who went on to be a Pharaoh herself. What we do know, and this is something we remarked on last time and will continue to see in the weeks ahead, one of the earliest commentary, if you will, on the Exodus. Well, it already starts in the Old Testament. Various of the authors comment on the Exodus. But the real clear commentary on this comes from the New Testament. And this is just one sentence out of a sermon by, or a speech by a man named Stephen as he was about to be stoned to death. And he comments that Moses was instructed in all the wisdom of the Egyptians. He was mighty in his words and deeds. He got the best education. He was in a very privileged position in society. And he used that, maybe even abused that privilege in chapter 2 as well. When he looks around, we saw this piece of art last time, looks around to make sure nobody's looking, and then slays the Egyptian who is about to kill one of the people of Israel. And he thinks he's doing everyone a favor by doing this, of course. But the next day, he sees two of his own people quarreling, and he goes out to scold them for that. And they bring up, what were you doing there with the Egyptian fellow? Pharaoh's going to kill you. And sure enough, Pharaoh wants to kill him, and he has to flee. And he flees into this area called Midian over here, which is a little bit to the east of the Sinai Peninsula, where he tends the flocks of his father-in-law Jethro. And we commented last time as well that Moses, in being rejected by his own people, in a sense foreshadows Christ's own rejection. Now, humanly speaking, there are a lot of good reasons why people rejected Moses at the time. What he had done was violent and wrong, and they were worried that this would lead to bad things for them. And, they can be justified in their kind of wanting to keep their distance from Moses a little bit. But as, again, Stephen comments later in his little sermon before he dies, there is a kind of stiff-neckedness about the people that begins to show itself already here in the story. And what began with Moses, the people rejecting Moses, and they're going to reject them again a little bit later, it happens to almost all the prophets, and then ultimately happens to Christ himself. So with that, Moses becomes a shepherd and tends his father-in-law's flock. He meets some girls who are out, women who are out looking after their father's sheep. He does nice things for them, waters the sheep. They get home early, and so he signs up for shepherding duties. And he's at it for 40 years. We learn that from the New Testament, again from Stephen, that he was a shepherd for 40 years. And in that 40 years, a lot happens in Egypt. New Pharaoh comes to the throne, Amenhotep II, we think. And he is known for his cruelty and his hostility to folks who are not Egyptian. And that, of course, puts the people of Israel right in the line of fire. And then we left it off last time with this wonderful verse at the end of chapter 2, where God, who so far has been kind of out of the story, chapters 1 and chapter 2, God's not really active, not really mentioned very much at all. All of a sudden, God hears the cries of his people. He remembers them. He saw them, and he knew. And it's kind of enigmatic how the chapter 2 ends with this knowing. What did he know? He knew their suffering. He knew what he was going to do. And in chapter 3, he springs into action. Just see, we have an email quick here. Oh, that's a funny one. Okay, well, that might be one we keep for next time. That's a good one. All right, Moses and the burning bush. Let's begin in chapter 3 here. And let's just read a little bit. If you have your pew Bibles handy, you might want to take them out and follow along. Exodus, of course, second book in the Bible. Don't have the page number in front of me, but if you thumb through Genesis, you'll find Exodus. And we're going to begin reading at chapter 3, verse 1. Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, as he led the flock to the far side of the desert and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. So Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. So just a few words of comment just on these opening things here. He's been tending the flock of Jethro, who's identified as a priest. Again, we're not exactly sure how that priesthood comes to be, but it was often the case in those days that the head of the family was also the religious leader of the family. And these are also descendants of Abraham, another branch of Abraham's family. And they are living over in this other area, which we call Midian. And Moses has tended the flocks. I'm just going to go back to the map slide here just for a second. Okay, there we are. And he starts out, I'll just make this a little bit clearer here. He's down in Midian here, but it's not unreasonable. Well, in fact, what clearly seems to have happened, Mount Sinai, the mountain, is over here. And so it's not unreasonable that he would, depending on the weather, the crops, everything, find himself going back over here with the flocks and caring for them over there. And it does sort of appear that, he's gone to the far side of the desert, which is this is largely desert area on the Sinai Peninsula, but he's over here on this edge somewhere tending the flock. The exact locations, of course, are unknown to us. But this mountain called Horeb will also be called Mount Sinai a little bit later. It's several names for the same thing. And there it is that he sees this bush on fire that is not being consumed. All right, so what does this all mean? Well, let's move forward a little bit. When the Lord saw that Moses had gone over to look, God called to him from the bush and said, Moses, Moses. And Moses said, Here I am. Do not come any closer, God said. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. Then he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. At this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. The Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave masters. I am concerned about their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and bring them out to that land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the home of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. This is one of these passages that they give you in seminary to see how you do at reading. And for the cry of the Israelites has reached me, and I have seen the ways that the Egyptians are oppressing them. So now go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. Very strange phenomenon that Moses encounters there, that he would be seeing the bush burning but nothing being consumed, that he would hear a voice without seeing any moving lips, that he would receive this call at this very odd stage in his life. Moses is 80 years old now. He spent the first 40 years growing up in Egypt, living in the easy life, if you will. But these last 40 years he's spent being a shepherd, far from power, far from influence, far from anybody's memory in Egypt. Not the Egyptians don't remember him, the Israelites don't remember him. And he's probably maybe sitting there thinking, so this is life, huh? Start off great, and then just kind of slide downhill from there. But God has another plan, and God begins to put that plan into action, and Moses experiences God's call. And I think there are a number of kind of inferences, points that we can draw from the experience here. First thing that kind of came to mind as I thought about, an 80-year-old man, and 80 is 80, getting this call from God, is that in a certain sense, you're of no use to God until you've come to the end of yourself. Moses may have had, as a young person, knowing his history, whatever he did know of his own personal history, a sense that, he knew he was an Israelite, and that maybe he was destined for great things among the Israelites because he had had the good fortune to be raised in Pharaoh's house. Maybe even in his mind, he thought a little bit of, Joseph, who had come before him a few generations, and how he, as a Hebrew person, was able to rise to great heights in Egyptian society. That maybe that kind of future was his, that he could go up and do great and wonderful things. But then the murder happens as people reject him. Pharaoh's mad at him. He has to flee. He's, to borrow today's terminology, he's been canceled. The rug's been pulled right out from under him, and for good reasons. He shouldn't have done what he did. And he's out there forgotten. Can a person come back again from that big a mess? And here he is. Probably going, this is it. This is my life. He's at the end of himself. And that's where God picks him up. And I think, sometimes that sort of thing still, you see this often, I think, in the Bible, where, people, as God will say later, not by might nor by strength, but by my Spirit, says the Lord. That this isn't all about your abilities and your talents and your gifts that you bring to the situation. But when you get to the end of yourself, then God is ready to start working with you. I don't know, does anybody have any reflections on that or thoughts on that? Anybody experienced anything like that? James?
Well, if God says, okay, I'm going to make you 40 again, you go back and lead the Israelites, and he goes back there, he probably was going to set up an armed revolt.
Sure.
Kill
Yeah, James makes the point that probably by waiting this long, we're dealing with a much more mellow Moses than would have been the case in his 40s. Exactly, a wiser man. Yeah, 40 was ready to kill him, and if he'd have taken over at that time, who knows what the bloodshed would have been like. Yeah. Good point. Okay. Sort of related to that is that God's timing's never our timing in life. How many times, I can't even count the number of times where I've experienced that in my life, where something has come along and this wasn't what I had planned. This wasn't what I wanted to deal with right now, or this wasn't a blessing I was expecting to receive right now. But in God's timing, in God's way, it's time, And I think we go through that, still today very often. And His timing is brilliant. It's not haphazard. Everything has finally gotten to that point, the same point that Paul will make in talking about Jesus in the New Testament. When the time was right, God sent forth His Son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those who were under the law. The Greek people will use, and we've talked about this before, but they have two kinds of time. This is obviously centuries later, but they have this time called kairos time, which is the appointed time, the perfect time. It's not chronological time, but it's the moment, and a very important time. Interesting, too, that the Lord uses fire to come and to speak to Moses. Fire is often something God uses, even into the New Testament. We won't look up these passages, but this is John the Baptist telling us that we are baptized with the Holy Spirit and with fire, that's what Jesus will do for us. And then on Pentecost Day, which is Acts chapter 2, the Spirit comes in tongues of fire. And it's interesting that God uses fire because fire is something you really have to experience. You encounter fire. You don't negotiate with fire. You don't work things out with fire. Fire is something that has its own energy, and you encounter that energy. And God is there in that fire. Again, too, we when we teach kids in confirmation class what it means that God is holy and that we are to fear God. God doesn't want us to be scared of Him or so afraid of His holiness that we don't come into His presence at all with our prayers and things like that. But it's kind of like fire. You don't play with fire. Or at least you're not supposed to, though most of us have at some point in time in our childhood played with fire, at least a little bit. But we learn from that fire is not something you mess around with. But yet, fire can do wonderful things. It heats, you can cook on it, it has any number of wonderful uses. But it needs to be respected. And, sort of in the same way here, God has many, many blessings for us in life. He wants to be our friend. He wants to be close to us. But God is also to be respected. Any comments, questions, observations? I don't want to babble on here at too great a length. All right. Yeah, this God identifies Himself as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Jesus will pick up on this in the New Testament as He argues with the Sadducees about whether there's a resurrection or not. And He will pick up on God's identification of Himself here. and a reminder that God is, even though Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are long dead, he's still their God. Which in a backwards kind of a way means, maybe they still have a relationship with God, even though physically they're dead. The God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And then what we really see here is that the plan that God has. This is in beginning at Exodus 3 chapter verse 7. I'll just reread this because I think this is where the action is going to happen. I have indeed seen the misery of my people. Remember how chapter 2 ended? I have heard, I have seen, I know, or God knows. I've remembered, and God knows. Well, we see these are now the actions that God refers to. I have seen the mystery. I've heard them crying out. I am concerned, or I know about their suffering, and I have come down to rescue them from the hands of the Egyptians, to bring them up out of that land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey. And then he gives us the catalog of the nations who live there. The cry of the Israelites has reached me. I have seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them, so now go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. This is the action plan. This is what's going to happen. God has seen it, God has heard it, God's experienced it, he's concerned for them, and he is now going to send Moses off. All right. Any other quick questions, comments? Check online. We have one. Come on. Here we go. Yes. God, comment made online, God could rescue his people in any number of ways, but he sent Moses, and as we're going to see, he sends us. I'll let you start this, and then we'll...
So the burning bush is this. So is this Moses not seeing God? Because can't look on God. Is this? Are we talking about second person of the Trinity here, or Yahweh?
Okay, hold that question, because that's what's next. You've read my mind or read the lesson sheet. You're getting one half step ahead of where we're at here. All right. Okay, so this is what happens at the burning bush. God comes, God speaks, God raises Moses up and gives him this job to do. But I would argue that this burning bush scene is remarkable not just for what happens at the burning bush, but maybe every bit as remarkable, maybe even more remarkable, for what does not happen at the burning bush. Because indeed, Moses is in the presence of God. And if you know anything about what the Old Testament says about being in the presence of God, you know that a person cannot be in the presence of God and live. God will tell Moses this, in a sentence later on in their journey together. You cannot see me and live. But here Moses is in the very presence of God, and that presence is made clear right at the very beginning of the account of the burning bush. We kind of skipped over this, but I did so very intentionally. What was Moses told to do? The minute he saw the bush burning and heard the voice speaking, right after his name was called, what did he do? What did God tell him to do? Take off his sandals, yes. For the place where you are standing is holy. So he's come onto holy ground, and the sandals are just sort of a symbolization of that he is in a holy place. But what makes it possible for Moses to stand in that holy place, what makes it possible for Moses to hear the words of God, is not the fact that he's taken off his sandals. That's all very respectful, all very obedient, maybe even a little more comfortable, all things considered. But that's not why he can stand in God's presence. The reason he can stand in God's presence is that the voice that speaks to him is, as the NIV translates it at Exodus 3, chapter 2, the angel of the Lord appeared to him. And whenever we hear that phrase or read that phrase, the angel of the Lord, or I think the ESV translates it as the messenger of the Lord, which is, of course, an angel. Whenever we hear that, we are encountering one of the great mysteries of how God makes himself known. Because the messenger of the Lord, really, when you get right down to it, is God himself, as James was pointing out. Most likely, as we know from reading the scriptures through and knowing that it's the second person of the Trinity, the Son of God, who will ultimately become God's ultimate messenger to us, as John tells us. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. He will take on human flesh. He will be one with us. But already in the Old Testament, the second person of the Trinity will make himself known in this mysterious way, this accommodation that allows for God to talk to be with people, and for the people not to be consumed in the presence of God. And so the angel is the reason. Yeah, this is already Christ we will know as Jesus Christ. This is already him at work in the Old Testament, speaking to Moses, just as he had done to Abraham, and just as he will do to any number of other characters in the Old Testament. The messenger of the Lord becomes the key, one of the main means by which God makes himself known. Oh, we're bringing them all the way back up today. Thank you, sir. Yes. That's okay. We don't mind. This story is all about being found in the weeds. Okay, yeah. Yeah, sure. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, good point. Yeah, the point that was made is that in the removing of the shoes, there's no barrier between Moses and the holiness, and that's absolutely true. Yeah, I mean, it's respectful, but it's also, he's right there in the presence and able to stand within that presence. Absolutely. Yeah, good point. Tim.
Does that mean we should come to church without any shoes or socks?
No. But some church traditions, if you're a Muslim, first thing that you take off when you go into the mosque is your shoes. As a symbol of the holiness. You can get a little too carried away with it, but it's again a symbol. In a certain sense, unfortunately today, I think in the church we've lost some of that sense of the holiness of God. We often present God, as friend and companion along the way, and that's all true, absolutely. But God is holy, and that also needs to be part of the presentation, part of the message, part of how we live. We live in the holiness of God. I mean, this is why certain things even that we do here in the front of the church, reverencing and bowing and things like this, you don't have to do that. There's no law in the New Testament says that thou shalt do this and that and such, but we're reminding ourselves, that this is holy. That's not just another table up there at the front. For us, that's the altar of God, a symbol of His presence among us and the holiness of this place. Tim, did I see your hand there?
I would suggest that's also reflected sometimes in the stuff that we give to the church. You go into the Old Testament times where God complains about the quality of the offerings. And how many times do we got something, we can't use it anymore, or it's almost used up or whatever? Let's give it to the church.
Yeah. Tim makes the point that sometimes in the quality of our offerings, yes, we sometimes treat the church, and say it can have what's left over. Not that we're embarrassed to use that sort of thing, but we the work we're about here is God's work, and so we were to give the Lord not just the first fruits, but the best. Yeah, absolutely. Tim.
Excuse me, Pastor, to take that one step further about removing his sandals. But Last Supper, Jesus got up and he removed the disciples' sandals.
Yes.
Footwear, and washed their feet.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that was the point, part of what was made earlier, and I didn't quite comment on it. But yes, when Jesus in the upper room before he serves them his supper, he washes their feet. The sandals come off. This is a holy thing that's going to happen here. This isn't just another Passover like the 50 others you've been to in your life so far. This is a holy. There's something special is going to happen here, and kind of in his own way by the washing of the feet. Yeah, Jesus is getting them ready for the next. Hold on here. This is really important. Absolutely, good point. Other comments, observations, looking over my shoulder, not seeing anything new in that. So this messenger of the Lord, because he's the intermediary, the one who makes it possible for Moses to hear this and to stand really in the presence of God. And there's all kinds of art about this, and we're talking about art in the sermon this morning and some other things like that. I'm not an art guy. I mean, I can only draw stick men, and even those don't work out very well. But I liked this particular painting. Don't even remember off the top of my head who did it. But we see Moses here, pulling off his sandals. Or, those look like European boots, actually. But anyway, and then encountering the bush, and out of the bush, whoever this artist was kind of got it. When you see this person here, at least when I saw it, first thing that came to mind, Jesus. Very, Christ-like, or, what we imagine Christ to be, Christ-like depiction of the voice, if you will, coming from the fire. All right. Any questions on burning bushes? Any burning bushes that you want to share with us? Or okay. We got another comment here online. We'll catch that here. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Just a reference to 1 Peter chapter 1 here. Just as the one who has called you is holy, so you be holy. Be holy because I am holy. That's exactly correct. All right. Burning bush. And Moses, of course, is a bit taken aback by all of this, to say the least, as would be anyone who's paying attention. And he has a question right off the bat. Verse 11. But Moses said to God, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" We're not going to have a lot of time to dig into all of this morning, but really in the next few verses, what follows are two basic questions that Moses has. Who am I, first of all, and who are you, second of all? And God here gives him some wonderful insights to begin his work. Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the children of Israel out of Egypt? I'm not the guy. I don't have the gifts. I don't have the skills. He's going to go on about this at some length into chapter 4 about his inability to speak, and he'd really rather just stay as a shepherd. Thank you, I'm comfortable with shepherding now. Whole being a leader thing's out of my system. That chapter's closed, and yada 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 yada. When we hear people say things like that, "Oh, I can't do it, I can't do it, I can't do it," we often respond, "Oh, yeah, you can. You got the ability. It's down in you somewhere. We're coming soon to nomination season here at Holy Cross. We're looking for people to be on boards, and people will say, 'Oh, I don't think I can do that,' and we'll say, 'Oh, yeah, you can. You can do it. You can do it. You can do it.'" It's funny that when Moses says this, God doesn't engage in any of that. He doesn't go, "Oh, come on, Moses. You got the gifts, you got the skills, come on." He doesn't do any of that sort of stuff. He just lets that phrase hang in the air. Who am I? Well, exactly, who are you? No, you don't have the gifts and the skills. He doesn't argue with him on that point. You don't got anything that you need for this job. But here's what God does say. And God said, "I will be with you." You don't got the skills. You don't got the gifts. Point taken. You're absolutely right. But you're not going alone. God will be with you. And God will help you. And God will give you what you need when the time comes. We'll unpack that a little bit more next time and move forward into the next big question that Moses has, which is back to God again and says, "Okay, who am I? But who are you?" With that, we'll leave it for today, unless there's any last-minute questions or comments from people here. All right. We're not ripping along quite as fast as I thought we would, but we will. We're making good progress through here. Anything else, Tim? Sorry. Yep.
I think the one thing to keep in mind is the context of this conversation. He's talking to God.
Yeah.
Like directly, and that's not something that people normally do.
No.
So there is that kind of what's really going on aspect to this. And then Moses says, "Well, who am I?" And God doesn't even answer the question. It just says, "I will be with you." It's just like, don't worry about all that stuff. I'm going to be there every step of the way. Because going up against Pharaoh, it was a death sentence if you said the wrong thing.
Yep.
So to go out there and do that on the basis of I'm having a conversation with somebody that I can't even see. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's all a little bit goofy, that's for sure. Yeah, and yet, but that promise, absolutely. Thank you for summarizing it all up very, very nicely for us. Okay, let's close with a quick word of prayer, and then we have to get ready for the second service here. Lord God, your timing is perfect. It's not always our timing, but you called Moses at just the right time to do the job that you had in mind for him to do. and you call us as well in just the right timing to do the things you have for us to do as well. And we pray that as you were with Moses, so you would be with us, and you would calm our questions and help us always to engage in the things to which we have been called. Bless us now this day, and grant us your peace, your guiding, and bless our second service as it unfolds this morning, that all things are to your glory for Jesus' sake. Amen. All right. We need to put everything away and get ready for the next part of the morning here.